everybody, I'm Robin Bady. I'm a storyteller, and I am also a teaching artist with Flushing Town Hall. We believe that global arts are for global kids. Today we're going to talk about the strange and dangerous journeys that the characters have to undertake before they get to the end of their fairy tale. I mean, everyone's life has ups and downs, but in a fairy tale, they're big. And characters have to contend with terrible obstacles like mean parents or nasty siblings or step-siblings, a witch or an ogre or a troll that wants to eat you, or perhaps they have a big distance to go, and how are they going to get there in time to save whoever needs to be saved? Sometimes they have to go through scary forests where sometimes wolves will jump out and eat you. Luckily, they have allies, magical or not magical, animals, and they also have courage, a belief that they can get through, that before the end of the story, they will get to where they're going. They will overcome every obstacle on this terribly scary journey that they've undertaken and live happily ever after. Today, I'm going to tell you a story called Molly Wuppie. It comes from England, and it's an interesting story. Molly Wuppie is brave and courageous, and she's taking care of her sisters. And this story also adds in an element of fairy tales we haven't talked about yet, which is royalty. When I'm finished with the story, think about how you might retell it. How you might retell it if it took place where you live, in New York City, or in Queens or Brooklyn, or wherever it is you live. How you would get through the obstacles, what your strange and dangerous journey is, and how you get to the end where everything works out. This is the story of Molly Wuppie. Well, Molly Wuppie lived in a family that had many children, and her parents could not afford to feed them all. So they took 3 of their daughters, of which Molly Wuppie was the youngest, and left them in the woods to fend for themselves. Molly Wuppie, she was the youngest, but she was the smartest. And she said, "Sisters, do not worry, I will find us what we need." And so they followed her, and they walked and they walked and they walked deep and deep and deep into the forest until they came upon a great house. And they knocked on the door, knock, knock, knock. And the door opened, and there was a woman who said, "You can't come in. I know you look hungry. I would like to feed you, but my husband is an ogre, and he will eat you faster than you can say yum, yum." Well, Molly looked at her sisters and then said, "We'll be okay. Please, we are hungry, and we'd love to come in." So the woman let them in, and so she fed them. And so they met the 3 daughters of this woman and the ogre, and they were all getting along really well when they heard big thumping and "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell something to eat." And there was the ogre. And when he looked at the 3 girls, his wife said, "No, no, no, honey, you can't eat them. They've been friends now with your daughters, and they're just going to stay the night and go on their way." Well, the ogre didn't know what to say, so he said, "Okay." But he made his plans. And all 6 girls, Molly Wuppie and her 2 sisters and the ogre's 3 daughters, went to sleep in the same room, 3 on one side and 3 on the other. And before they went to sleep, the ogre came to them and said, "Here is a necklace of straw for each of you to promote good sleeping." And so he left, and they all went to sleep, except, of course, Molly Wuppie, because she noticed that The daughters of the ogre and this kind woman who had fed them, they were wearing gold necklaces. So she took the straw necklace off her and her two sisters and put them around the ogre's daughters, and then took off their gold necklaces and put them around her neck and that of her sisters. And she stayed up to see what would happen. And sure enough, in the middle of the night and a little bit past that, the ogre came stamping in, and he went over to his daughters and he felt the straw around their necks. And he went over to Molly Wuppie and her sisters and felt the gold chains. And then he went back to his daughters who had the straw around his neck, and he took up a big stick and he started beating them so much. And then he went downstairs and went to sleep himself. And then Molly Wuppie woke up her sisters and said, "We've got to get out of here. We got to get out of here. Come." And they did. They ran out of the house before the ogre, who was sleeping, or his wife, could stop them, and ran and ran and ran until they found a road. And they followed the road until they came to a castle. And this was a castle of a great and good king. They didn't know that. They just saw it was a great big castle house. They knocked on the door, knock, knock, knock. And the king let them in and said, "What do you want?" Molly Wuppie explained that she had just defeated, well, tricked the ogre, and she and her sisters needed a place to stay and some food to eat, and could they stay there? And the king said, "Surely," and gave them rooms to sleep. The next morning, as they were eating breakfast, Molly and the king were talking and talking, and he said, "You really defeated the ogre, right? You tricked him?" She goes, "Yes, I did." "Well, if you can get that big sword that's over his bed, I'll marry one of your sisters to my oldest son." Molly thought, my sister may or may not want to get married, but this is a good way to take care of us. And she said, "Of course, I would love to do it. All I ask you is just give me something to eat to take along the road." And so she went back, walking the way that she and her sisters had run. And right before she got there, she ate something because she didn't know when she'd be eating next. And then she waited till it got dark. She snuck into the house, went up to the ogre's room, and saw the great sword over his bed, and she grabbed it and started running out the door when she tripped. And the ogre woke up and said, Molly Wuppie, I know it's you. You made me beat my daughters till they were almost dead. I'm going to come get you." And she called back, "Maybe you will, and maybe you won't." And she ran and she ran and she ran until she came to a great chasm. And she took a hair out of her head and she threw it out, and it became a bridge. And she was able to walk over the bridge of one hair. Of course, when the ogre came to it, he couldn't walk on one hair. And so he watched her go. "Molly Wuppie, I'll get you yet." She said, "Maybe you will, or maybe you won't." And she took the sword to the king, who was so happy to see it. He offered his oldest son to one of her sisters, and the oldest sister actually liked him and said, "Well, I'll consider it. Thank you very much." And the two of them went off to talk to see if they could get along enough to get married. The king and Molly and her middle sister sat down to have some food, and the king said, "Nice work there. Let's see. You know, that ogre has some gold under his bed that once belonged to me, and I would give a lot. I would give my middle son to marry your other sister, if you would agree." and get that gold for me? Molly Wuppie said, what a great idea. Now, of course, she didn't know whether her sister would want to marry this fellow, even though he was a prince, but she did know that she loved the idea of this adventure. And besides, if she did do it, her sister would be secure for the rest of her life. And so she asked only for something to eat. And she went on her way. And she sat down right before it was time to walk over to the castle, and she ate so she would have some strength. And then she waited till it got dark, and she went into the castle, and she went again to the bedroom of the ogre and looked under the bed, and sure enough, there was 1, 2, 3, 4 sacks of gold. But Molly Wuppie wasn't afraid. She knew she could carry it, and she just pulled them all out. Quietly. I have no idea how she did that, but she pulled it out and down the stairs and out the door. But wouldn't you know that one of the sacks got, ripped open and some of the coins fell out. And that's when the ogre woke up and said, Molly Wuppie, it's you again, isn't it? I'm gonna get you yet. She said, maybe you will, maybe you won't. And she took the sacks and took what was left of that sack of gold and ran until she got to a great big chasm, and she took one of her hairs out and boom, put it over, and she walked across the bridge of one hair. When the ogre got there, of course an ogre can't go over a bridge of one hair. So he said, oh, Molly Wuppie, I will get you yet. She goes, maybe you will, maybe you won't. Let's see. And she went on her way. Well, the king was so happy to get all that gold back, and he didn't mind that she had left a little back there. It wasn't all his, actually, so who cares? The ogre can have it. And his middle son and her other sister, they looked at each other. They decided they liked each other, and whether they got married or not, I don't know, but they went off and started talking. And this left just the king and Molly Wuppie. He said, Molly Wuppie, you're amazing, amazing. There's one more thing I do want. I want the ring that's on the ogre's middle finger. Can you get it? Molly Wuppie thought, I don't know. You can be married to my youngest son. What do you think? She goes to herself, he looks really nice. One way or the other, I will be taken care of with all that I've done for the kid. I've done 2 tasks. Now here's the 3rd. So she said, of course I will. It'll be an adventure. And all she asked for was something to eat. And she went down the road again, and she sat down right before she went right over into the great big house of the ogre, and she ate what she had as a way to sustain herself and make sure she wasn't hungry. And then, when it got dark, she crept in to the house and up the stairs. And there the ogre was sleeping with his hand just like this over the side of the bed. And she went up quietly and she started pulling and pulling and pulling until she finally pulled it off. But with the final pull, the ogre woke up and he grabbed Molly Wuppie. He said, see, Molly Wuppie, I have you yet. But she had the ring, which she had slunk into a pocket. What should I do with you? What would be the terriblest thing I could do with you? She goes, I think the worst thing, and I hate if you do this to me, so please don't, is you would put me in a bag with a dog and a cat and hang me up over there, and then maybe come back and give me a couple of whacks with your stick. What do you think? He goes, I like that. Yeah. And he got a bag and he put her and a dog and a cat in. She held that dog and cat close while he hung it up. Well, he went away to work, and the ogre's wife came by and said, "What's it like in there, Molly?" She goes, "Oh, it's amazing. You would not believe what I am seeing. It's too magnificent to even describe." She goes, "Well, can I see it?" Well, you're going to have to take me down, and I'm going to have to let you in, and I'm going to go out, and I'll have to go and tie it back up and hang it up again. Oh, well, the ogre's wife was so excited. She took that bag down, and she got in, and Molly got out, and the dog and cat went with her, and they tied it up and hold it up. And then Molly Wuppie left. But as she was leaving, she saw the giant coming, so she hid to see what would happen. And he walked up to that bag, and he took his stick, and he goes, "Okay, Molly Wuppie, I'm going to give you what you asked for." And he started to hit that bag. Well, I got to tell you that the dog and the cat started screeching. And the woman said, "Let me out, you lummox, let me out. It's me, your wife." But he didn't hear her because of the dog and the cat. And he just kept hitting and hitting until finally she said, "Let me out." And he recognized the voice of his wife, and he pulled it down. Meanwhile, Molly Wuppie had taken off, ring in her pocket. She was laughing fit to die. And he went after her. He said, Molly Wuppie, I'm going to get you yet." She goes, "Maybe you will, maybe you won't." And she pulled the hair out over the chasm. She walked over safely. He, of course, couldn't do that. "I'm going to get you sometime, Molly Wuppie." And Molly Wuppie looked at him and said, "I don't think so. Bye." And then she went back to the castle, gave the ring to the king. She liked this youngest son. I think they got married. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But they all lived, I can tell you, happily ever after.